He knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Hello once again to another Supervillains Explored video, and today I'm going to be taking a look at, this is going to be a little bit of a different video where I'm going to be talking about one of the main enemies of Iron Man, the Crimson Dynamo. There have been 13 different men who have assumed the identity of the Crimson Dynamo. However, I'm only going to take a look at six of the 13 men. The first six, which I think ought to be enough for one video. The very first man to assume the guise of the Crimson Dynamo was a scientist named Anton Vanko, who is a very brilliant and successful Soviet scientist who creates a suit of armor dubbed the Crimson Dynamo, which is demonstrated to be just as powerful and effective as Tony Stark's Iron Man armor. When the Soviets realize that they have a very powerful weapon on their hands, they send the Crimson Dynamo over to America to try to defeat Iron Man. When Tony Stark defeats Vanko and his Crimson Dynamo armor, Vanko pretty much defects to the U.S. and he vows to serve Tony Stark because he doesn't want to face the wrath of his government because he failed to destroy Iron Man. However, the Soviet Union sent in two evil agents, one of which was the Black Widow. This was back during the Black Widow was sort of a villain, and another agent named Boris Turganev, who actually stole Vanko's Crimson Dynamo armor and tried to destroy both him and Stark. But luckily, Vanko used an experimental laser pistol and killed Turganev, but it ultimately ended up killing Vanko as well. So, technically, Turganev was sort of the second Crimson Dynamo. The third Crimson Dynamo was a very depressing character named Alexander Nevsky, who was actually the apprentice and protege of Anton Vanko, except like any chance he has at having a good future as a scientist is pretty much silenced whenever Vanko defects to the United States. So what ends up happening is that Nevsky ends up developing an intense hatred towards America, towards Iron Man, towards Tony Stark, but mostly towards the Soviet Union for ruining his life. Eventually, he's trained to be an assassin in the KGB, and he's given a brand new Crimson Dynamo armor to attack Tony with. Ultimately, he's defeated once again by Iron Man, and he ends up dying in Vietnam. He ends up dying in Vietnam. The next Crimson Dynamo is also another sad case named Yuri Petrovich, who was actually the son of a man named Ivan Petrovich, who was a very loyal friend of the Black Widow. Yuri Petrovich was an orphan who actually never knew that his father was still alive. So, he was also recruited by the KGB to be an assassin. the KGB equips Petrovich with a highly upgraded and highly advanced Crimson Dynamo armor, but then he's eventually defeated by both Iron Man and the Black Widow, who turns a new leaf and becomes a superheroine and forms her own sort of semi-superhero team. Eventually, Petrovich is imprisoned in a prison camp, making way for the next and probably the best of all the Crimson Dynamos, Dimitri Bucharan. Now, Dimitri Bucharan is part of a Soviet program called the Soviet Super Soldiers, and as a member of this program, he received Yuri Petrovich's Crimson Dynamo armor, and with just some slight tweaks and upgrades, he was able to make the armor work extremely well for him. I'm serious. Bucharan, he was extremely adept with all the technology that he had at his disposal as far as the Crimson Dynamo armor went. And he's definitely the guy who presented the biggest threat to Iron Man, because for once there was actually a Crimson Dynamo who had the wits and the technology to match that of Iron Man himself, which is probably why Bucharan was the longest living out of all the Dynamos. He pretty much lived throughout all of the 80s, and I mean all of the 80s, like the entire decade. That's right. Bucharan was probably the longest living out of all the Crimson Dynamos. He first appeared in like 1978 as the Crimson Dynamo, and his last appearance, at least as a villainous Crimson Dynamo, was like in 1990. So yeah, he's the most prolific and the most intelligent out of all the Crimson Dynamos. And he's certainly the one that everybody remembers a whole lot. But he's my favorite out of all the Crimson Dynamos. I mean, I'm serious. He's the smartest, he's the fastest, he's the most tech savvy. He's just the best one out of them all, period. The next Crimson Dynamo is Valentin Shatalov, who is a KGB agent and a decorated Soviet colonel who forms a group of who actually inherits a whole new upgraded Crimson Dynamo armor from a secret Soviet organization, and he uses this armor to form a brand new team of Iron Man villains, including the original Titanium Man. However, the original Titanium Man is unfortunately killed off, and because of this, Shatalov is forced to forfeit the Crimson Dynamo armor. And those are all the Crimson Dynamos I'm going to talk about on this list, because honestly, I could honestly go on about all 13 Crimson Dynamos that were made, but I feel as if I should stop while I'm ahead and sort of briefly explain why I chose to do this character. Honestly, my opinion is that I've always thought that, at first when I researched this character, I thought it was silly that there were like 13 different people who inherited the title of Crimson Dynamo, but now that I realize it, it's a tradition as far as Iron Man is concerned. I feel as if as long as there's an Iron Man, there needs to be a Crimson Dynamo. It's the same thing with the Mandarin. I consider Crimson Dynamo to also be Iron Man's arch nemesis alongside the Mandarin, because Iron Man was a character created for the Cold War, and both Crimson Dynamo and the Mandarin are characters who symbolize the worst of the Cold War fears, which were communism and, of course, or socialism and Marxism. the Mandarin obviously emphasizing Chinese communism and the Crimson Dynamo emphasizing the Soviet rule, which was probably the biggest fear at the time. And explaining this character may make him seem very outdated and boring, but honestly, I think if they can make Iron Man a more relevant character and as popular as he is now, I have a feeling that you can take a character who is as awesome as Crimson Dynamo and make him an awesome villain for any live-action movie or cartoon. Hell, Mickey Rourke's character from Iron Man 2 was basically a fusion of basically contained several elements of the Crimson Dynamo, so we may see him in a movie yet. You never